This is the WoB X98. It's one of my favorite boards in my collection, and I've been using it for quite some time now. The typing experience is comfortable, it sounds great, looks good, and it is my preference for a Poron gasket mounted board. But today, we're taking a look at the WoB X98 by WoB Studio, the same creators. But does bigger mean better? Let's find out. Before I start this video, thank you to PCBWay for sponsoring. PCBWay is great for prototyping, providing their various services. I personally used the CNC option, and for a one-off, I was pretty happy with the results. Their CNC service offers a huge variety of materials for all your needs and a decent lead time. They also offer PCB services, 3D printing, and much more. The turnaround times are quite decent and the website is super easy to use. They offer this at an affordable price with great reliability, and are more than willing to help you with questions. For more, visit PCBWay.com. Let's get back to the video. Let's get into the unboxing. It comes in this really cool box that I just wanted to show off. It's pretty neat, and I haven't really seen anything like it. While packaging isn't a feature per se, I always do appreciate having a nice experience before the build. I also do want to mention that this was sent out, but all thoughts are my own as usual. Opening it up, we have another small box. Then we get straight into the keyboard. The color I chose was the sort of brown and gray anodization. It comes in this little protective sheet, and removing it shows off this absolute beast. There's this rainbow PVD-X, daughterboard connection and battery, and the brass accent that they had on one of their previous boards. Following the same design language as their previous work, we see a small brass bar and the WoB X98 text engraved. Taking a look at the smaller box, we have quite a bit of stuff. Included is Gateron Ink screw-in stabilizers. I've generally heard pretty good things about these. Then are what looks like Durock V1s for the numpad area. Because this PCB is 1.2mm, it is recommended to use these stab shims that aren't included. These will make the total PCB thickness 1.6mm. Spare screws and some other hardware. Of course, included are the rubber feet and tools you'll need for assembly and disassembly. Contrary to the previous WoB Studio boards, the X98 does use these stock style gaskets we've seen on other boards like the QK65. This does also have a separate plate for the numpad, which supposedly helps with typing feel. I received 2 daughter boards, but I believe there should only be one extra, just in case something happens. Next up is this Lego style instruction manual. I've never seen this with a keyboard, but it looks pretty awesome. While you can certainly use this, I really don't think it's needed since this is a pretty easygoing build, even for beginners. There are tons of foams included as well. While I personally don't like foaming up boards, this is extremely subjective, so it's up to you to decide what you want to use. There's various Poron sheets for the case. There's also an IXPE sheet that's similar to the PE foam meta that's been going around. This unit has a standard 1.5mm polycarbonate plate, but other materials are available. I got a replacement PCB they included for my X98, which was broken, so it didn't really do much, and this absolute monster WoB X98 PCB. This Bluetooth hotspot PCB has Kale sockets, multi-layout support, a Bluetooth on and off switch, a Bluetooth microcontroller, and so many flex cuts, man. Like, there's a flex cut for basically every single switch, and honestly, this PCB is unreal if you're into that sort of thing. We've seen the same thing on some other boards lately, and I'll get into why I don't like it a bit later. So, although they included stabs, I really didn't feel like doing much work, so I whipped out the TX stabs that's been the hype lately. Honestly, I should have just used the ink stabs, but oh well, what's done is done. There's nothing wrong with TX, but I think I messed it up the first time and it just didn't sound as good as it should have. I'm a big fan of Tay Keyboard's videos, and the first thing he does is always chuck on the rubber feet. So of course, that's stuck in my head for every single build I've done, and a natural thing for me to do at the start. I went ahead and lubed all these stabilizers off camera, and my god, this was just such a pain to do. There are so many stabs on this build. Like, I think this is the most stabs I've lubed in one session. I just absolutely hate stabs, but yeah, I got through it like a champ. And like I said, since it's a 1.2mm PCB instead of 1.6, it's recommended to use shims, otherwise you will probably have some stab wobble. So also, what I did here is actually scuffed. I should have just done shims on top of the PCB rather than under, which I did fix later, but for some reason I was thinking that shims always had to be on the underside of the PCB, and I was so confused since there was a hot swap socket blocking one of them. I got stressed out for like another 10 minutes, and then I realized how stupid I am eventually. For an additional cost, WinStudio does also include some switches. And these Gateron CJs are so fantastic. Like, I think they're the best stock switch I've felt so far. I wish I used them, but I ended up going with stock SOTCs for the first build, which honestly wasn't the best choice. Then I tossed on the gasket socks that this board utilizes, unlike the previous one that used pour-on strips on the case. I didn't use any plate foam in the first build, but I did use some case foam. Assembly was super easy after that, just plugged in the battery, the daughter board, and screwed the case back together. Let's take a listen to how this Wind X98 sounds in a couple different configs. As always, please remember sound is dependent on tons of factors. So the sound is pretty different between those tests. The first one only used case foam and it had some thin sounding long pole JWK linears, while the second one used a more full sounding Cherry MX Brown as well as plate foam and the tape mod. The third one was the exact same as the second, but omitting the tape, so it really highlights the differences. I think the conclusion that I've come up with just purely off these is that the board needs a lot of tweaking to reach a sound that's for my preference. I still haven't came across it, and I probably could with a little more time. It sounds super thin in the first one and extremely low pitched in the second one, a bit more comparable to the X65 in the third one, but the spacebar doesn't have as much liveliness to it. There are some things I noticed different between the two boards. I'm not sure how big of a difference this one makes, but the use of gasket socks rather than pour-on I think causes that thin sound, or at least contributes to it. Because that same type of thin sound is also there on the QK65 when PE foams or similar things aren't in use. So yeah. The other reason this sound could be thin to my ear is the insane amount of flex cuts. Flex cuts generally can result in a more muted sound, but I think this is just flat out too much for me, and I wish this trend would sort of die down, or maybe they'd have an alternative PCB offered with no cuts or less cuts. I'm not sure if this makes a huge difference either, but my friend Near Lucid and I had different hotspot PCBs. His was 2 pieces, the numpad being separate, but I have the Bluetooth version, and WinStudio said that they had to keep this PCB in 1 piece, which I think probably does have a minimal effect, but I did feel the need to bring it up. The group buy version of the board also has top mount, which should be pretty interesting because it can do both of those mounting methods. Unfortunately, I can't speak on how that would sound, but I'm curious to see how it'll go. As for comfort, this board is pretty comfortable. The typing angle isn't steep at all, stiffness can be tweaked to your liking, and even when using all the foams, it's not too harsh. The layout is pretty preference based, I think it looks nice, but personally, I don't use anything bigger than a TKL. The brass accent next to the arrows is a little nice flare. I prefer the previous RGB light bar, I'm really a sucker for those, but nothing major. And this X next to the escape key is super subtle, but looks so great. It took a while for the bezels to grow on me. They're for sure bigger than the x65, but I think it's suitable given that it's a bigger layout. The ano on the board is also pretty standard. It's not insanely smooth, but it's not rough. There were no issues with streaking or anything, which is good, and more colors will be offered in the group buy. The Bluetooth hotspot version of this PCB runs on LDN. While I don't know a whole lot about the software, it seems fairly easy to remap keys. There's a bit of a learning curve, but I think it should be pretty simple. We can turn on Bluetooth by holding these 2 keys. Then the device simply gets recognized in the Bluetooth option of Windows, and it should work on Mac as well. Setup is just super easy. Doing this allows you to use the board wirelessly, which is a feature I'd like to have on more customs since I do enjoy having a wire-free desktop. So, for some final thoughts, I think the board is actually a decent work keyboard that many have been looking for, but only if you have the patience to tweak it to your liking and accept that it might take a little more work than usual. Pricing isn't wildly expensive, I'd say it's pretty justified. I'm sure it would have sounded better if I had used the IXPE foam, but that marbly sound just isn't it for me as it gets boring after some time. As always, personal preference with that subject, and I don't want to get too in-depth into it. That's all I have for today. I'm sorry if this seemed a bit rushed and I didn't cover some things. College apps are going on at the moment and these next couple of months are extremely important to me. If you do have any questions, please drop a comment and I'll do my best to answer, or join my Discord. You should do that anyway, but yeah. If you enjoyed, subscribing is much appreciated, and follow my socials if you think I'm cool or whatever, that would be sick too. That's a wrap for now. Peace.